Good morning, everyone, from the European Parliament in Brussels. I am very sorry not to be with you today in beautiful Galway, but I'm very grateful to have been asked to share some thoughts on the Charter of Fundamental Rights and economic governance, and I thank you, Padraic, for the invitation. The EU has long prided itself, and rightly so, on its foundational values. The Charter of Fundamental Rights, first drawn up almost 20 years ago, therefore plays a central role in the EU's self-identity. In the current challenging political climate, the Charter's values provide a way for the EU to positively differentiate itself from other parts of the world and to show leadership. But they must continue to be actively lived within the Union itself. And who, when reading it, can fail to be inspired by the Charter's words, covering everything from the prohibition of torture, to the right to equality before the law, to fair and just working conditions, to freedom of expression, to health care, and to the right to social security. The Charter, as you know, applies to Member States only when they're implementing EU law and to EU institutions. So, for example, the European Commission's country-specific recommendations for Ireland in 2018, as part of the European semester, notes the need for more social housing, for quality childcare. And indeed, I note that those two issues are currently highly visible, both in the media and politically, and clearly there is an internal and external pressure to deliver. The creation of the European semester was itself part of a drive to strengthen European economic governance in order to prevent a financial crisis from happening again. The changes have been significant over recent years, from a reinforced Stability and Growth Pact through to the Commission assessing national budgets and monitoring national policies. But what of the Charter in all of this? A Charter which, coincidentally, came into legal effect at the height of the financial crisis. We might sometimes question what weight it has been given in policy making, and particularly in times of crisis. Most of us can remember very clearly the day the decision to ask for a bailout was taken, and later the arrival of the Troika. The crisis years caused hardship to many, and we need to remember that, even if our economic growth now tops the Eurozone. Lives and careers were damaged, and many people took their own lives through stress. Greece recently finished its own bailout odyssey, which is welcome, but that achievement is of course tempered by our awareness of a society deeply hurt by unemployment and by stringent welfare cuts. So all of that shows the gulf between messy reality and the nice words of the Charter. A former colleague of mine, referring to the various charters and conventions that all of us are supposed to abide by, used to say, live it, don't laminate it. So the question is there too much laminating of fundamental rights and not enough living of them? As European Ombudsman at the height of the crisis, I was often asked by people from some of the worst affected states how to complain about the decimation of their health service, for example, or other erosions of social protection. Yet, as the Troika was not itself an EU body, there was actually no direct accountability. They could rightly protest at the gap between the Charter right to healthcare, for example, and what they were actually experiencing. The migration crisis is another obvious example. People dying at sea in Europe in the 21st century as they try to reach the EU, or if they make it, kept in camps at the borders, or suffering all the indignities of not fully belonging to a society. These facts challenge us to think about the extent and application of our European values. In years to come, our grandchildren will look with shock at what happened and question our actions. And by that time, much of the messy realpolitik and compromises will have been forgotten, while the pictures of the dead will remain. Within the EU itself, the difficult path to getting a member state's breach of the EU's fundamental rights formally recognised is testament to the political and other filters through which these rights are often applied. It would be naive of us, of course, to expect the wider political context not to have an influence on policy making. But what we can expect, and what I certainly expect as European Ombudsman, is that decisions are explained and that there is accountability for them. An example. In 2011, the journalist Gavin Sheridan asked for the release of a letter sent in 2010 by the then ECB President Jean-Claude Trichet to Brian Lenihan, Finance Minister at the time. The ECB initially refused to release it, finally doing so in 2014 after I had asked it to. Clearly, the letter, essentially urging the government to ask for a bailout, should have been released much earlier. The least decision makers can do particularly when their actions so directly affect people's lives, is to be transparent about the reasons for these actions. This is clearly also the case when it comes to European economic governance as a whole. Governments have voluntarily pooled oversight in this area in the interest of protecting the wider system. Yet it can be difficult to explain how the legislation works to citizens, for whom European economic governance can be seen as very abstract, yet nonetheless with very direct influence on the choices their government makes on issues that directly concern them, such as government spending. It is for this reason that I have also pushed for more transparency from the Eurogroup, the informal gathering of Eurozone finance ministers. Until quite recently, there were no agendas for its meetings and no records about what it decided. This was unacceptable for a body that has taken extremely consequential decisions, including on financial aid and the conditions attached to this aid for several member states. The Eurogroup has since taken some minor steps to improve transparency, and there is generally more awareness about the importance of proactively informing the public about its deliberations. It is an area I will continue to focus on in future. EU politics is at times more complex than national politics, whose institutions and faces tend to be more familiar to us, obviously. And that is why it is so important that the public be equipped with the necessary information to hold decision makers to account and to ask probing questions, including, when necessary, about the importance of the Charter in EU policy and laws. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very successful workshop.